Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Whelan. I am proud to announce a new venture. I started this podcast back in November. I'd like to thank Coach K, Coach Bob Hurley, Seth Greenberg, Kevin Houston from Army, uh, Miss John Samoji, the dad, Kristen Samoji, the player, Alon Wright, Brett Topel, Hubie Brown, Paul Blake Smith, Jay Horowitz, Matt Brust, Adam Zagoria, Nicholas DeMarco, Arcatano, Ian Penderluth, and Steve Tober for taking time at a midlife crisis. I decided that the show probably needed another voice. I was told the show would need another voice. I had to make sure it was the right voice. I put an advertisement out. Lo and behold, a friend of mine, Jerry Calla from the Greenville section of Jersey City, said, I'm on board. Jerry is well versed in knowledge. He's going to lap me on everything. He'll do his research. Diehard Nick fan, diehard Georgetown Hoya fan. What other are you diehard? You're the voice of Woodbridge football.
That is correct. I'll be entering year 2 in that. Yes,
and then also the varsity girls coach of Woodridge. So yes. I'm proud to introduce to you.
This is some intro, Jimmy.
This is some intro. It's got to be an intro. So
I might walk off now then after this build-up.
Drop the mic, but the show's going to be called.
Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be here with you. I obviously had to wait for Jimmy to go on his own to do a few guests to see how it worked, and then when I said, okay, this is going pretty good, maybe I'll be a Johnny come lately and jump on. But I thank Jimmy for inviting me. Jimmy and I are longtime friends. Former coworkers, and we look forward to to doing this. And the plan is to have a wide variety of guests, diversify our guests. Our first guest was tremendous. It was University of Pittsburgh legend Bobby Martin. A very good interview. That was our episode 1. Bobby really gave us a good insight into his career and, what he's doing now, which is, absolute nothing but, short of spectacular and, just being a positive influence, for student athletes, coming out of high school, looking to play at the next level.
And the show is,
by the way, I have to give it to you. You had a very, very, very heavy hitters. That's like a murderer's row of guests that you have had.
I don't know how I do it. I guess it's a labor of love.
I don't know what you did or what you pulled off, but it's most impressive.
Well, it's New Jersey, so cash is king, right? So you start bribing people with suitcases, then next they want to come on. No, I think the first couple guests I had just Alabama definitely opened a lot of doors. Of course, Coach Bob Hurley. You grew up with the Hurleys in Greenville. He's willing to talk to anybody. They're accessible. You can even see that with the son. He's accessible. He's great. We've crossed paths, especially when the Miracle of St. Anthony came around. But the show is going to be called Sports Consiglieres. We're looking for a sports show. I'm Irish. Jerry's Italian. So a consigliere, I guess I'll take it out of Tom Hagen, Robert Duvall's character. But this is not.
That's some comparison, by the way. Yeah, that's big shoes to fill, Jimmy.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no way as
long as I'm not Sonny.
Yeah, exactly. So, but this has no way has any organized crime affiliation. It's just a catchy name.
Alleged.
And so, Jerry, you can tell what is a consigliere. So, and can you have 2 consiglieres? Is that something that you can?
Normally, being a organized crime buff myself, I would say there's normally one who just offers advice on all facets of operations. I mean, listen, we're making jokes about, organized crime and the mafia. But again, you look at, I'll use somebody, like Brian Cashman. He has multiple consiglieres, if you will, that he listens to before, he operates. And it's just I would say it's somebody who is there to offer sound advice, to bounce things off. And I would say in sports, there's definitely more than one, hence the title, assistant to GM, vice president. You look at the Giants, NFL draft was huge. Another huge success as far as the in-person attendance, if you will, never mind everybody that followed on social media or actually watched the telecast. But you look at, a team close to my heart, the Giants, Joe Shane as Brendan Brown, a lot of people that he's brought in, from his, previous stops in Miami and Buffalo, that offer him advice and bounce things off of. And that's kind of what, we're going to do here. We're going to, talk about sports, local, college, professional, and the goal here is to, talk about as many things as we can, and, and ultimately pair that with some entertaining guests, and I think, our listeners will come away wanting to come back, or hopefully they'll want to come back. Excuse me.
And let's face facts. You want the overnight shift at WFAN. That's what you're really advertising for. So,
listen, as a big fan of Steve Summers, the midnight schmooze,
yeah.
and then into Joe Beningo.
So, well, let's dive right into the draft. We talked about the draft to happen. You're a Giant fan. I'm a Giant fan. What do you think about them? I guess they're keeping Jones. Didn't go with a quarterback. What do you think about the Giants draft? And then it's also said, I think I heard Craig Carton said this is a year that Dable and Joe Schoen have to really deliver, or else they're out of a job. Do you agree with that? And you think that they're in a rebuild, or you think reload? Or I thought they need an offensive lineman. They went with wide receiver. So, what's your take on the draft?
Well, I mean, again, as far as the draft itself, and we'll stick to specifically to the Giants, and then we'll get back, to the draft in general, if you will. But as far as the Giants go, I mean, I think there's a lot of people, a lot of fans, that were disappointed that they didn't take a quarterback. Now, you look at it, why is that? Is it because of, and I think it's more because of Daniel Jones's durability more than his production, because, you look at, unfortunately, I say this all the time, you look at Eli Manning at the end of his career. I think the Giants really did miss the boat with having the right pieces around him towards the latter part of his career. I think Odell came in, it was a little late. Daniel Jones's career has been filled with pretty much almost an offensive coordinator, a new offensive coordinator every year. The stability hasn't been there. The offensive line has been in shambles. And again,
they signed Pugh right off the couch.
I mean, Pugh came off the couch. And again, to Justin Pugh's credit, I thought he did more than a serviceable job. I mean, again, he came in and he was a little undersized, but like you said, he came off the couch. Now, again, as far as this draft goes, there's some conspiracies, there's some other things. I mean, most people were thinking they were going to try to trade up to 3 to take who eventually the Patriots took, which was May. There's a small conspiracy, if you want to say, being floated around that the real reason they wanted to get to 3 was because they knew that Arizona had Harrison Jr. pegged, at 4, and they knew that San Diego was going to pull the plug on Joe Alt, and they really were interested in Joe Alt. And when I first heard that, I said, well, why would they trade up to do that? But, I mean, again, you look at Joe Alt was taken. Harbaugh had the best, quote about him was when they said, well, how come you didn't take any weapons for Herbert? And he said, an offensive tackle is a weapon. And there's not a truer statement because, look at the Giants, saga, if you will, never-ending saga, at tackle, minus Andrew Thomas, who I think is, really on the right path. The hope is that Evan Neal, can bounce back. But I think that's a remarkable take because did they really want May? I really felt they weren't going to take McCarthy at 6. I thought that would have been a stretch. And ultimately, I think they really took the player, or I should say they drafted the position that they needed to draft, which was to get Daniel Jones support. Is Joe Schoen on the hot seat? Absolutely. Is Dable on the hot seat? Absolutely. And I know that might sound harsh in year 3, but that's the reality of it. As much as John Mara is reluctant to make changes, and it's funny because I think what really bothered him was getting rid of Shermer after 2 years and then Judge after 2 years as well. And now I think the last thing that he wants to do is to have that turnover. He's looking for some stability. But again, let's call it what it is with a guy like Belichick, who's very close to the Giant organization. He's out there. I mean, yes, do they have to produce? Yes. Were they in a position? If you look at it, did they make a decision not drafting a quarterback because they're not going to be around to develop said quarterback? I mean, I guess you could make that argument, but I think most people in the Giant organization, I think most fans are expecting them to return 2 years ago, like 2 years ago, go to the playoffs. It was remarkable that they won, at Minnesota. Daniel Jones played very, very well. And I think that's what most people, expect. And now
And
with
it seemed
new,
like Martindale and Dable were after
it
that
was
game.
becoming it was
Yeah,
becoming a cancer. Yes, you
yeah,
can't have a divided locker room, and
locker room.
that's a whole nother. We could do a whole show
Yeah,
on that dynamic.
we might have to. So
We might have to, right?
if I can't get any more guests, we might have to. But
What I
so but
find remarkable, though, it's funny you bring that up. What I find remarkable about Martindale is, and I thought he did a good job when he was here. I thought the players really took to him. I mean, I think there was a lot of guys willing to run through the wall for him. But in the end, I think it goes to show you, Dable ultimately won, quote unquote, that contest, if you will. And the fact that he is not in the league, I think
yeah.
speaks volumes.
Yeah,
I
he's
mean, I
over at
really
I
do.
think he ended up at Michigan, right?
He
He was
ended up at
he,
Michigan. As a matter of
uh,
fact, one of the Wilkins guys who was on his staff with him, they were part of that little clique. It was the Wilkins brothers that he brought over from Baltimore. One of them, I believe, just joined him in Michigan as well. So all three of those guys who were very outspoken with the players about Dable, about the offense, are not in the NFL. So I think that is a credit to Dable. I mean, you look at Martindale when he was jettisoned, so to speak, from the Giants. He was linked to multiple jobs, and I would like to think those organizations called the Giants, and I like to think that it says a lot about Dable in a roundabout way on why they're not in the league anymore.
what do you say their overall draft grade is? The Giants, do you think?
I would say with the amount of picks, they did well. I know what keeps coming up is the third selection. You draft a corner that had no interceptions in college. That has a lot of people perplexed, if you will. Joe Shane addressed that by saying that they were happy. What they saw out of him. He just needs, to polish up, improve on his ability to finish. But I thought at 6, I thought Neighbors, was the right move, to make for them.
And who knows? With no interceptions, maybe they didn't throw his way because he's such a lockdown corner. I mean, you need a
Right.
lockdown corner
Right.
in the NFL. So let's just look at the draft. We talked just preparing for the show. You said it didn't really look there like there was too much hype to the NFL, but you seemed like everything was scripted. It really wasn't any drama. Every draft is different, but like everybody kind of knew Williams was going number one. Did you like the Bears move, getting rid of Fields? I mean, I thought
I
it was
mean,
really yeah.
they couldn't, listen, we you talk about the draft and you look at it. The draft went scripted until Atlanta came on the scene. I don't think there's really too much that surprised anybody until that point. The fact remains is that what I find interesting is you had 6 quarterbacks drafted in round 1. Then you had 0 in rounds 2 and 3, which I think that's the only time that's ever occurred in the draft where it was 0 quarterbacks in rounds 2 and 3. But the first round, 6 quarterbacks. What's going on in Atlanta? Nobody
Uh,
knows. I mean, you hear there's rumors, that there's people are floating out. Well, that the general manager, I believe Terry Fontenot is his name, is concerned about tampering to get Cousins. That the Falcons did indeed tamper, but at the end of the day, if they are found guilty of tampering, they're going to be the penalty is going to be draft picks. So I don't think that's a feasible reason on what they did. And then the second thing is, I would think what makes a little bit more sense, are they scared, which would go into the question, get into the question of why did they give him the money that they did? How is Cousins recovering from his Achilles injury? At his
Yeah.
age, it's a very tricky injury, as we all know. I mean, Aaron Rodgers seems to be bouncing back and ahead of schedule. But I mean, why, again, you invest the money that Atlanta did into Kirk Cousins and not get him immediate help for this season? That's a very, very, very big question that I think they have to answer. I mean, you want to read into it. You saw the video of the GM and Arthur Blank kind of having a spirited discussion. They denied that they were talking about that. Arthur Blank looked completely surprised that that selection was made. But, I think it goes to show you it was, how they're saying that Atlanta, it was a bad pick. Denver reached, with their selection of a quarterback. But at the end of the day, you had 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round. And what that tells you is that solidifies what we all know, okay, is that it is a quarterback driven league. The days
Absolutely.
of
Absolutely.
the game manager, the Trent Dill, we're going to win a Super Bowl with Trent Dilfer.
Yeah. Neil O'Donnell or
Neil O'Donnell, or
yeah.
who, there's a lot of guys you could put in there. It is a quarterback driven league, which why it didn't shock me in the least.
Although they didn't win in Pittsburgh, Neil O'Donnell, they lost to the Cowboys. So
well, I mean,
bad example. So
well, but here's the deal though. When he had a god awful Super Bowl, he made Larry Brown very famous very quickly. But he did get them very far in the playoffs. And if you look at those Steeler teams, he was a typical game manager for Barry Forster, and and there was a lot of guys, Bam Morris, and then they played a lot of they played defense, and that's those days are over. I mean, again, you look at Pittsburgh, having 2 quarterbacks now, and I think, people are like, well, why would they do that? Why would they get Fields and why would they sign Wilson? I mean, financially, it's a low risk, high reward deal for Wilson. So there's no big financial commitment. And, I actually like Justin Fields. I think there's a lot left in him, and, we'll see.
I think sometimes change is good too. Change of scenery is always good. So what?
Now you also have the ex Falcon head coach, at at Pittsburgh now as the O coordinator. So you have to give Tomlin credit. I mean, he made that change, and they're looking to change what they do, which is a testament to the reason why he's been in the league as a coach, as long as he has.
And what teams did you like? What moves did they make? And like I'm looking at like Arizona. I mean, they have Murray, who's a weapon. It looked like that team was ready to make the move, and then injuries. They signed J.J. Watt. They signed the Hopkins, a big receiver. I said they're going to make a move, and then he just got it petered out, and they lost their GM. Now they take Harrison. Do you think that's going to be what draft status teams did you like, and who do you think is lurking in the weeds that's going to propel himself this season?
Well, as much as I'd hate to say it, I mean, I think not only the draft, but what they've done in free agency, you have to give it to Philly. You have to give it to the Eagles.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think a lot of people are scratching their heads on what the Cowboys did. They brought back Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, there's I don't want to get into cowboy bashing, but there is one common denominator in Dallas, and I think that comes out of ownership. I'm surprised that they retained McCarthy. I Prescott is a short, with his contract status, right? He's pretty much gone, I would believe, after this year. They brought back Ezekiel Elliott. But again, I think if you're asking me, the only question that I do have, and I think it's a big question, and I don't think a lot of people are discussing it, is, and you have to give it to them, is Philly was very aggressive. They brought in Barkley.
And they signed Brown 3 years. He got paid. So,
but there is a big turnover in the staff. So that's something I think to really keep an eye, not so much when they start up the OTAs, but I think when they get into camp, the preseason, it'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of new faces, but there's a lot of old faces. As the Eagles are strong, I think they got stronger, but I just think that we'll see. Does that how the continuity develops, or it's going to take time to develop, and how quickly they come together. Because they did replace a lot of staff members. Again, a lot of people.
And that's what usually happens too. You're successful, and then other teams start cherry picking your staff.
Yeah,
your old coordinator,
that's correct. I mean, again, he took
so,
heat. He took heat about the defensive coordinator spot. Last year he tried bringing Matt Patricia in to clean that up. But the bottom line is, it's going to kill me as a Giant fan to watch it. I mean, Barkley stays healthy. With Hurts, that offense is going to be, very, very, very difficult, to stop in that division. And, you could make the argument that Dallas really improve. I would like to think the Giants are going to have a bounce back year. That all really depends. I mean, is Daniel Jones going to be healthy? Is he going to be the week 1 starter? If that's not the case, the Giants right now for 2024 are married to Drew Lock. Again, somebody that has experience, as a starter, being placed into the starter's role. He's shown he played well at times in Seattle. But I think, taking this, wrapping this all up, if you will, I just find it remarkable. I mean, I think it's really remarkable if you look back, when we were younger in the 80s. You had these little phones. Guys, teams are crammed
Yeah.
next to each other.
Yeah,
Nobody
notepads
was
and
present. And now, I mean, the amount of people that show up in person, in costume,
yeah,
it's
and
unbelievable.
it's an event. It's definitely
It's
an
more,
event.
it's more than an event. I mean, the numbers that they compared this thing to, for the amount of people, and I mean, it was good. They had good weather in Detroit. It's good for a city like Detroit.
Yeah,
Now the
especially
funny thing is now they pivot. The NFL has this down to it's a well-oiled machine. Now the next major event is the schedule release. I mean, I
yeah,
remember as a kid, you get the daily news. All right, the Giant schedule came out. That was it.
yeah,
Now it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
a big deal.
Well, yeah,
Who's on prime time?
it's 12 months out of the year. Like,
Absolutely.
like the Super Bowl ended, and then now it's a draft. But like ESPN,
Yeah.
they made, and now like it's over 3 days. Round 1 is on one day. It's like almost like a Broadway performance the way they have it, and then it's the way the kids are dressed, and the war rooms are even
Absolutely.
decorating
Yeah.
the war rooms now and everything else. But talk a little bit about Detroit. What do you think about MCDC up in Motor City? Dan Campbell. What do you think about them? And then do you think he flubbed? Do you think he flubbed? He should have went for it when he kicked the field goal, and kicked the field goal when he went for it. What do you think about?
Well, I could say
rewind-
this as a Giant fan, it's good to see. Dan Campbell was Jeremy Shockey's backup. Obviously, a lot of his ex teammates have nothing but good things to say. I think they're in a good spot as well this year. Everybody's a year wiser. Everybody will be a year better. I mean, again, he got killed for that. Again, I like Detroit a lot this year. I mean, there's some people that think Detroit's the best team, in the NFC. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you look at Dan Campbell and getting away from that call, what was the right call? Did he make the right move? I think if you look at his introductory press conference, I think a lot of people thought it was, gimmickry, if you will, gimmicky. But I mean, he is in 2024 a player's coach. He's got guys that want to run through a wall for him. I mean, he really, 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 or the organization really has done well with sticking with Goff. And I thought Goff got a bad rap, so to speak, coming out of the Rams. He's done a great job, and again, I think, don't be surprised if there's a Detroit Philly, NFC East final. I'm sorry, NFC, championship, NFC final.
And then we were remiss to say, you talked about the Giants. other injury, the Jets. What do you think about Aaron Rodgers? You think that's, think he
I mean,
comes back?
again, the Jets are going to go as far as Aaron Rodgers can go. I mean, again, defensively, I think they're even better than the stats indicate. I know a lot of people really rip, Robert Saleh. They really ripped him last year. I mean, again, what was he supposed to do? You lost your Hall of Fame quarterback. You had to go back to a guy that probably knew the organization, his time in the organization was going to be over sooner than later. And I think the players generally like Saleh. I mean, from what you see with Rodgers, I think he likes Saleh. They got a tackle again to protect Rodgers. A lot of people were disappointed they didn't get Bowers, the tight end, who ultimately went to Vegas. You can make the argument, who's going to throw him the ball in Vegas, but ultimately the Jets did what they had to do, which was what was the problem? Granted, it was a few plays. You could count on one hand. Rodgers went down. They need to protect Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
You look at that division, you have Miami, I think, is very, very inconsistent. They're all over the place. New England is in a rebuild. And I think Buffalo, as much as I love Josh Allen, is probably headed for a little bit even more than they were last year of a setback. Point being, Rodgers is healthy. There's no reason to think the Jets can't win that division. Now, get into the playoffs. His ride is going to be much bumpier, I think, as opposed to if he stayed in the NFC. Being in the AFC. I mean, you still have Kansas City. Kansas City is still
And we
Kansas City.
haven't even talked about Kansas City. So what do you think about? Yeah, Mahomes is,
I mean,
he did,
again, they kept a lot of the pieces in place. They drafted speed. Yesterday, the big news was they reworked and extended Kelsey. I think right now, I would, if you're asking me my take, I think the Jets. There's no reason to think that the Jets cannot win the division. There's no reason to think that the Jets can't even make a strong run in the postseason. But again, there's Baltimore. Baltimore is always Baltimore. You can look at it. Baltimore is going to have a very strong regular season. Baltimore, unfortunately, as much as I love him, I love the family. I think they're good for football. John Harbaugh is good for a bad playoff loss. It's inevitable, unfortunately.
but
Again,
at some point though, Jackson's going to win one of the. I mean, he's too talented of a player. I mean, it's going to be, and he's still young. They're 25, 26.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
so at some point they are gonna win one of these games. It's just that now you got Kansas City waiting in the wings. So
Well, it's like anything else, right? It's like timing, right? We could use the NBA comparison. How many championships would Patrick Ewing have if Michael Jordan,
yeah,
wasn't in the league at that
yeah,
time? I mean, that's really what it is.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, other than
Well,
that, though, I mean, it's really, again, you can't say it enough. It's remarkable what the NFL draft has become, and it's really remarkable what the NFL has become. Now you had the commissioner talk, during the draft on how he really, 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 wants to kind of really flatline the preseason, go to 18 games, an 18-game regular season. That's going to take some maneuvering with the union, as does everything else. And, I think what we're really going to see these next few years is, as much as teams don't like it, no matter what they say publicly, you're going to see a lot of games being played in a lot of parts of the world. I mean, I think that's only going to grow.
but do you think the game will grow? I mean, think that there's an appetite in Europe and Mexico and now
I
Brazil to do
mean,
that?
you look at the attendance, and the attendance is good, is very good, right? But it's something new. I mean, can you put an NFL franchise, in Europe? Can you put an NFL franchise where travel is going to be difficult? You're going to have to give a team a bye. You can't, and if you don't get a bye, you can't play that following Thursday. I mean, you look, I think the NFL has to be careful. I think playing games is good. It's good for the league. It's good to get exposure, and I think this exposure, to answer your question, I mean, is it going to grow? I mean, can the Super Bowl grow any more than it has? I mean, it grows every year. But I think the NFL has to be very careful because I think Roger Goodell would really like to put a team overseas. And the example I use in professional sports is how the NBA had a jettison, or they helped jettison the Vancouver Grizzlies out of Vancouver because of the travel. And it was just brutal. Now, I know the travel in the NFL is different than it is in the NBA, but I think that's a problem as far as
Well,
putting a team there.
well, do you ever think that the CFL up north, they're talking that they're on financial hard times. I think the CFL had a little
Right, they
niche
did.
market, but do you ever think that there would ever be NFL going up to Canada? It seems like an easy transition, you know, Toronto, Montreal. I mean, some of these places. You ever think that maybe the CFL and NFL might come up with some sort of agreement or a minor league
Well,
system?
I tell you what, I don't know if they would look. I mean, they're not going to take over, those that league, if you will. But if you look at it, excuse me, you look at every professional league in the United States: Major League Baseball, the NBA, obviously the NHL, Major League Soccer. Okay, what they all have in common that the NFL doesn't have is they all have franchises in Canada. So
Yeah.
if I'm, that's something, you brought this up, which is why I'm addressing it. That's something I think would probably make a lot of sense, a lot more sense than playing these games, overseas. What do you get? I remember reading Tom Coughlin's book. They played one of the first games in Wembley. They played Miami. And he said it was an absolute disaster because it was like an hour and 15 minutes each way just to go to a practice via bus. And then you get the surface of the field, which I know they're trying to improve, that sort of thing. And it has improved since that game. That was like a mud bowl. Manning actually ran in slow motion for a touchdown. But I think, it's nice, for these, said countries. They get exposure in person. It's something they don't do, obviously, often. But again, what benefit is it, for the league? I think
Yeah.
the league would probably be, it would be more prosperous to do what you just mentioned, which would to be get in like the other sports leagues to get into, the Canadian market. What's the Canadian market right now is probably obviously the Buffalo Bills and Canadian football. But I think with Canadian football, I think once upon a time, when they got Rocket Ishmael, they were trying to replicate in a smaller degree, what the the old USFL was doing, which was maybe to offer guys more money, a little more exposure, and I think the Canadian Football League, I think is a good league. I mean, it's something different. It's 110 yards. The field is wider. It's wide
Yeah.
open.
It gives players another chance
It gives
to,
players
there's a
another
lot.
chance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Warren Moon had a successful Doug
Yeah,
Flutie.
yeah,
Doug Flutie speaks highly of the CFL. So I mean,
yep.
that's something there. But I know we're kind of running out. But the draft overall, like, do you ever see the draft coming into New York? You ever think the draft might?
Well, I think for the draft being in New York for so many years, they want to move that
Yeah,
around.
okay.
I mean, that was historically, that's obviously where the draft was held. And I think that's what it's become. The draft is a miniature version of what they're doing with the Super Bowl. Just keep going into different areas. You look at, I mean, I thought it was great for Detroit. They had great weather this time of year, as we know. Weather
Yeah, I know,
very
and it's not really on somebody's vacation plans. Let's go to Detroit. They had Nashville, I think,
right.
before COVID, and the place was going nuts.
Correct.
In 2019. But then, of course, and also you talk about the draft. I think COVID, that was like the first sports thing that they had. It was virtual, but I mean,
That's
I don't know what the
correct.
ratings were, but I mean, the ratings were off the roof. But I mean, we'll see. But I mean, I always loved the draft. But this year, I guess, because you kind of knew, like you said, you kind of knew where everybody was going. It really wasn't that much drama to it. You didn't know. You kind of knew Williams was going number one, but and kind of felt the script that you
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you
For the
said.
most part, I mean, my prediction beforehand was that, every year there's usually a team that screws up the draft, and I was actually banking on the Commanders doing that at 2. But again, they went, like you said, they went. If you look at most mock drafts, the morning of, the day before, the night before, whatever, they had that predicted. I mean, I think as things went on, you knew, San Diego, wanted Alt, to protect Herbert. And, that's another dynamic too. I mean, the criticism out of there is, you kind of lost some weapons, for Herbert, but that's why they're, I guess they had to quote unquote defend, their pick
Yeah,
of a tackle there with a good receiver core. They could have took Neighbors. I mean, there was a lot that could have happened, but very interesting again in the coverage. I mean, I remember I was remarking the other day to somebody. I remember when Rich Eisen left ESPN and he announced that he was starting, or he was going to be a part of the start of the NFL Network, and
yeah, sure.
people were like, "Oh, what do you mean? So it's going to be 24/7? This thing's not going to last." And
Yeah,
not only has it lasted, it has grown, and it's
yeah.
unbelievable.
And those the football documentary. I watched those. I mean, there's nothing going on. I have that on my um you know on my TV. They're always good to watch too. I mean, those are there's always some old games and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just and football is definitely the number one sport in the U.S. I know, like a couple years ago when they had the movie with concussion and everything else, it kind of took it back. But I mean, it's still the number one sport. I mean, baseball. I mean, you and I are baseball fans. I mean, you know, I don't know. It's kind of
I hate to say it, baseball's sinking.
yeah. So I mean, it just does not capture this younger generation. And I love baseball. That's what we played growing up. So, but anyway, well, listen, Jerry. I know we were going to talk about the Knicks, but I think that you came prepared with the NFL draft. So I think that we'll say the Knicks when they get to the second round. So, but listen,
Well, let's hope that's the case. But I think, I guess that would be our episode 3. I think we will we will do a review of the NBA playoffs, and we will do a forecast of the teams that are remaining with
man, I'm
the.
I'm still looking to try to find a Georgetown Hoya. I got a couple
You
leads
have
out
to
there.
have a
So
Georgetown Hoya.
So it's just 84. It's going to be 85 to it, and I'm sure they don't want you don't want to leapfrog having a Villanova guest on before Georgetown
That's
Hoya
right.
guest. But anyway, Jerry, listen,
Many
thank
exciting guests coming down the
y-
road, as
yeah.
we've discussed.
Well,
So,
listen, Jerry, you spoke most during this episode. I was just basically, just here listening. I want you to close this out. This episode, actually, this will be episode number one. I think we're going to use Bobby Martin for episode number two, just
okay.
because of the lifespan of the
Well, Jimmy,
episode.
you told me you were paying. You told me you were paying me by the word, so that's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
I'm doing
So,
this. So,
so
again, listen, this is something new for the both of us. I mean, Jimmy kind of cut his teeth a little bit with some really solid guests, solid interviews. We look forward, to delivering this podcast as often as we can. We look forward to people listening. There's a lot of, we're in the infancy stages, if you will, and we have a lot of plans, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be a lot of entertainment coming your way. And again, it's going to be coupled with interviews of various personalities, along with some talk about current events. So again, this is a wrap for episode 2. Please join us back very soon for episode number 3, which we will discuss the NBA playoffs. And we will also update everyone on who will be our next guest.
and I'd like to thank. I'm still down here at Chop Studios with Dave Sturcio down in Manawan, New Jersey. So he helped me start this venture. Helping with this venture. So and Jerry, listen, I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's really been great. It breathing new life into the show. Obviously you're bringing a wealth of information, and I'm really excited about where this is going to go and where it's going to take us. So I'm really excited. I'm glad to have
Likewise.
you on, and I really appreciate you being on, and really it's been great, and this is great conversation, and we talked about this all the time at work. Now we're just videotaping it. So
That's it. That's
yeah,
all it
so
is.
so so we
Yeah.
always talk about. Well, listen, Jerry, God bless you. Good luck to the Knicks, and listen, love you, miss you. Thank you very much for coming on and really
Same here, buddy.
starting this venture. So this is going to be episode number 1 of Sports Consiglieres. So I guess we'll have to explain everybody what a consigliere is every episode. But we're gonna get social media up and running, so look for that very very soon. But
Absolutely.
this is Jimmy and Jerry signing out. Episode number 1.
Take care, everyone.